Welcome to another episode of Code for Thought. Welcome back to Season 8 of Code for Thought. I hope you all had the chance to take a break, relax, and recharge your batteries. For this first episode of this season, we're going to look beyond open research. Beyond Open Research is the name of a project at Imperial College in London, and it's quite an ambitious title. Why ambitious? Because agreeing with the principles of open science and research, including open source software principles, the FAIR principles, and all of that is one thing. And there are a number of initiatives already. Take, for instance, the agreement between CERN, the Nuclear Physics Research Facility near Geneva, and NASA in the US, who held an Open Science Summit in 2023. Or various declarations, like, for instance, the Declaration on Research Assessment, or DORA, or the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, or COARA for short. There certainly is no shortage of declarations and expressions of intent. But how to implement it all and how to change research culture is quite another thing altogether. Research centers and universities are often complex organizations, and adopting open research principles, with all that they entail, has a significant impact on how these organizations operate. So, when I heard that Imperial wants to go beyond that is beyond open research, I definitely wanted to find out more about it. And so my guests for this episode are Dr Hamid Khan, Open Research Manager at Imperial College, and Professor Julie McCann, Vice Dean for the Faculty of Engineering. We're going to start with Dr Hamid Khan, who goes into more details about the Beyond Open Research project and tries to answer the question what the beyond in the title means.
Thank you for having me. My name's Hamid Khan. I'm the Open Research Manager here at Imperial College London, and my main remit is academic engagement with the research community across multiple faculties and departments, trying to support them to understand open research practices, equipping them with the confidence and the know-how and the skills to engage with open research in every aspect of what they do.
Well, open research is a big thing, and you've been running a program, I believe, that's called Beyond Open Research. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Now, Beyond Open Research has a very interesting subtitle, and the subtitle is Understanding What Matters for Quality and Reliability. And I think this is the thing that really articulates what we're trying to achieve by going beyond open research. We recognize the fact that across the college there is a great deal of good practice already in terms of the things that people are doing to make their research robust and high quality and reliable. And we understand there are several, factors that contribute to this. So things like transparency, equity, accessibility, reliability, and where these things intersect with governance, recognition, and increasingly artificial intelligence. It's an awareness of the fact that there is this good practice going on already, but a lot of it is very disjointed. Very little of it is recognized as part of the whole. And there are many stakeholders, I know that's not a great term to use, but for want of a better word, we'll go with stakeholders, who are involved in improving quality and reliability, who maybe don't know that that's what they're doing and would not describe their research as being, or their work as being contributing to quality and reliability.
So is the disjointed aspect that you refer to then that people don't know what other departments are doing, that it's not sort of the kind of same style, or how can we envisage this disjointed thing that needs to be brought together?
Yes, it's partly that. It's partly down to the fact that there is a great deal of autonomy and devolution within this institution, which is good because it means that departments and faculties have the freedom to run their affairs in the way that they think is right. But also it does contribute to the fact that sometimes there is a lack of awareness of what others are doing, particularly when it comes to something like open research, which benefits from coherence in terms of what you're doing across the institution. So that's one of the things that we're trying to, I suppose, rectify in this project is bringing those key stakeholders together across faculties and departments in a sort of common cause, I suppose.
And for that you've been organizing 4 workshops. So what did they cover and what were you doing there?
Yes, there were 4 workshops. We recognized that Beyond Open Research has a number of facets to it, and one of them is related to research culture. because you can have the best, systems and practices and process you like. But if it's not linked to the culture of the way that you do your work, then you'll never really be able to focus on the things that improve quality and reliability. So this was the motivation for the 4 workshops. And the second factor that contributed to this was the fact that we are benefiting from Research England funding. So we're very grateful for that. But that funding runs out on the 31st of July, 2024. And that means we're limited in terms of the level of change we can make. We're ambitious, but we're not over-ambitious. And so I think we've been very realistic in understanding that there are specific aspects of open research that we can try to address in this first phase of the project. And that's why we decided to run these workshops focusing on the quality and integrity of research data. Trying to understand the challenges and opportunities of making data transparent and open, and how we can develop and embed the practices that would help us to systematically, or rather systemically, improve the quality and robustness of research data as well. So the first workshop was looking at engaging with researchers and professional staff and technical staff around the college, trying to work with them to identify the challenges, barriers, and opportunities of engaging with open data practices, and indeed why it matters here at Imperial. But what's really interesting about this series of workshops was that we also involved the public.
In what way?
In the way that we considered the public to have a crucial stake in this discussion. Now, there was some, I think, maybe skepticism about whether that was the right way to approach this question, because you might well ask, what interest does the public have in Imperial's research culture?
Indeed. And how are they aware that something like that happens at Imperial in the first place?
Indeed, absolutely. And my argument was that actually the public have a great stake in the quality of decision-making in their lives and how research evidence is used to inform decision-making that affects their lives. So in this way, we decided that actually framing the topic in a way that was tangible and meaningful for the public would actually help us to get some really good answers. So that's why in Workshop 2, we talked about the reliability of artificial intelligence and other data-based applications in public life. So it was a scoping workshop essentially to identify public questions and concerns about that topic, and also helping us to gain that really important societal context, understanding, how to put the public interest at the heart of Imperial's research culture and what that public interest might look like as well. So I'm really pleased and proud of the fact that we did that, and it was a great aspect of, I think, some of the novelty in this project as well.
So one of the questions when we talk about public, I mean, it's a rather broad thing. So what kind of public, and how did you actually get people to go to Imperial to this workshop, and how was that selected?
Yeah.
Who's the public?
Who is the public? Well, it's a very good question. And maybe it's better to refer to publics rather than public, because there can be more than one group that is involved in this. So we talked specifically to patients within the Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust, particularly based around the White City campus and the local community there. And we engaged also with clinicians and clinical decision makers as well within the Healthcare Trust, trying to understand specifically those public questions and concerns around the reliability of AI in patient treatment, and using that as a way of asking essentially, what is this concept of open research for? What is the point? And ultimately the point is to represent the public interest and to produce research that is in the public interest and that is answering a need and an urgency in public life. So that's what I think we got out from this. We were really grateful for the support of several colleagues around the college who were part of the project leadership team. So I'd specifically like to thank Kelly Gleeson, who is the lead Cancer Research UK nurse within the Department of Surgery and Cancer, and colleagues within the societal engagement team and the Patient Experience Research Centre as well, who really helped us to refine the way that we were talking to members of the public and engaging them. And I'm really pleased to say that as a result of that, we were able to get as many as 40 members of the public in the second workshop, which I think is a pretty good outcome.
So I think we've done one on transparency, then basically sort of AI. So what were the other two?
The other two, the third workshop was really interesting because we brought then the two groups together, the group of researchers and professional and technical staff from workshop 1 and members of the public from workshop 2. So whereas in those first two workshops we were talking about identifying some of the challenges of data transparency and scrutiny, in workshop 3 we focused on what do we do about this? What are some of the potential solutions that we could adopt as a college going forward? So we were talking about, really co-creating practical and meaningful solutions that would promote and enhance data transparency, quality, integrity as much as possible. Things like the FAIR principles of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of research data. Concepts like peer review of data, which is something that I think is a very underdeveloped concept, but is definitely something that we'd like to look into. And then asking the right questions about the reliability of applications that are based on data as well. What do we know about the source of data that has been used to train this application? What do we know about how biases have been identified and addressed? What do we know about the assumptions of the model and to the extent to which it has been externally validated? And what does that even mean? So those are some of the questions that came out of workshop 3.
And workshop 4, that was the last one that was just recently at the time of recording.
Yes, absolutely. At the time of recording, workshop 4 was held just over 2 weeks before. And this was a recognition of the fact that it's not good enough just to have nice processes and nice questions to ask. You have to find a way to recognize and incentivize it. And this was really interesting because we had embedded this workshop as a part of the program right from the start. And we had already intended to have a conversation about what matters, about recognizing and incentivizing quality and reliability. But it's interesting, actually, that in the first 3 workshops, that was something that explicitly was mentioned as a challenge that needs to be addressed. So the fact that we already had that workshop coming up was, I think, a great sign that we were thinking about this in the right way, and that the way we had approached this topic really resonated very strongly with the people that we were talking to. So what came out of that 4th workshop was basically around this idea of publish or perish research culture. What do we do about the fact that whether we like it or not, at the moment things like transparency and quality and reliability are not the things that are recognized as part of research culture. It's all about how many Nature papers you've got, all about the journal impact factor. And so we were using concepts like DORA, the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, COARA, the Coalition on Advancing Research Assessment, and various initiatives that others have come up with, such as Octopus, which is developed by Dr. Alex Freeman, and some of the work that has gone on here already, thanks to the likes of Professor Stephen Curry, really bringing those concepts together and trying to distill, what matters. If it's not the journal impact factor and it's not the number of Nature papers you've got, what are the things that actually matter for quality and reliability, and how can we promote them, and how can we support the Imperial community to engage with them? And there was a thread that was running through this in your conversation with my colleague Jeremy Cohen, who's the co-lead on the project. You will be aware of the Research Software Champion side of this project as well. Now, how does that feed into all of this? Well, of course, as much as there is a challenge around transparency and quality of research data, so too there is a challenge, the same challenge in terms of research software engineering as well. So there's a great deal of, I think, coherence between the two legs of the project, if you will. And so I was really pleased that Jeremy got involved. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to really make sure there was a key contact point between the two sides of the project. And it's the research software champions themselves who have provided that contact point, because to a greater or lesser degree, several of them have actually been involved in the workshop program as well. And we've been using that as an opportunity to develop their skills in terms of facilitation and note-taking.
The project title is Beyond Open Research, and open research itself is quite difficult to obtain, as you mentioned, because people might be aware of it, people might be even practicing it, but they might be practicing it in different ways that makes then interoperability or even reusability more difficult. So implementing that is difficult enough, but what then is beyond open research?
Yes, I was really hoping you would ask this, actually, because
Okay,
I'm really interested to talk about what this means, this idea of beyond open research. So I think there are really 3 things we need to understand when we talk about going beyond open research. Firstly is that if the thing we care about is quality and reliability, then simply opening up your research does not by itself imbue it with quality or reliability. And the same is true for research software. Simply making it data and software open doesn't mean that best practice and positive research culture have been followed in sort of underpinning those outputs. So it's about identifying what more do we need to do beyond just the fact of openness and transparency in order to embed quality and reliability. Some of the things that came out of the workshops were around the need for training for researchers, around creating a community that could advocate best practice, and around making sure that the processes and infrastructure are embedded across college systems as well. So that's one thing.
If I may paraphrase it, it's not enough to actually put your software project on GitHub as a public project and open, with an open license. You might actually also think about how do you help people to reproduce the results that your software provides.
Absolutely. And so one example of this was around the conversation of data management plans.
Right.
There is a college policy around data management plans, but what we want to do is support colleagues to make that meaningful. So instead of saying, I'm going to dump my data on GitHub and here you go, actually, if you make sure that the processes that embed strong metadata, strong licensing details, making sure that the FAIR principles are embedded as part of your data management policy, you can start to refocus that data dumping towards meaningful transparency of research outputs. Now, as I say, this is not to say that none of this is happening at Imperial. Yeah. This is to say there are specific challenges that we are facing at college level that we can mitigate through the implementation of a college-wide system or improvement of college-wide systems for these things.
Yeah, I find this quite interesting because we're talking about FAIR principles, we're talking about open science, but maybe there's a risk that we turn this into checkbox ticking exercises. Yes, I'm putting this up on GitHub. Yes, I do have a license file, but how do I fill this with meaning? I think the challenge is that you need to keep going, that you need to keep working with people. So how do you see this beyond open research then moving forward and keeping the momentum going and actually avoid having it turned into a checkbox ticking exercise, I guess what I'm getting at.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And of course, the project goes on. This is just phase one of the project. One of the things that I'm really keen to do is to take everyone that has been involved to this point and support them to develop a community of practice around some of the ideas that have come out of this. Now, what that does is it creates a community that can advocate for best practices. It creates a community that can contribute to decision-making and policy development around these practices. And because we are always working directly with the community in terms of co-creation and co-development of ideas, what we're able to do is hopefully address legitimate questions and concerns that the people working on this actually have. And in so doing, we create a system that hopefully is legitimate and accountable and robust, and where the ideas that we come up with actually are implementable and workable in the eyes of the community that is implementing them. And that's the way that I think we can avoid this becoming a checkbox exercise, as you say.
And it also depends on the people who are involved in this. Ultimately, what you need is to have people who are points of contact, for lack of a better phrase. How do you ensure that going forward? Is that a question of funding? Is that a question of policy within the university, within Imperial College? How does this work?
It's a little bit of everything. Of course, we will be seeking more funding to continue this project at college level, and indeed to involve external stakeholders as well. So one of our partners, our external partner on this project was the UK Reproducibility Network. We're really pleased to have them involved because they've done so much good work at UK level on addressing some of these very questions. And I think being able to tap into their existing knowledge and their existing network has really been helpful for us and will be helpful going forward. And as well as funding and as well as policy development, I think one of the keys to this is continued engagement.
Yes, indeed.
And that's something that, I'm obviously very passionate about in my role. I think through careful, constant and strategic engagement with the right people at the right time, we can keep the momentum going for this, whether we have funding or not, I would say.
Okay. It's a little bit like herding cats, isn't it? How's the experience been for you? I mean, how receptive has the college been to all of this overall?
Overall, I would like to think that it was very positive engagement from the college. I mean, part of this comes from the fact that, we received this money from Research England in the first place on enhancing research culture. And the fact that we received that funding would suggest to me that there is appetite within the senior leadership team of the college to engage in a meaningful way with these issues. So I was really pleased to see that. And secondly, the fact that I think this particular project is in some ways unique, because out of all of the excellent projects that have been funded across the college, and we are one of 10 or 12, I think, this is the one that I think has the most overarching ambition and the most overarching scope in the way that it has the ability to apply across different departments, across different subject areas and different functional areas. And there is something that everyone has that they can contribute to this. And to give you an example of this, one of the innovations that I'm very proud of is the fact that we've been able to involve professional and technical staff in the college as well. Previously, and this is not an Imperial-specific problem, I think it is a sectoral problem where it tends to be that researchers are very closely involved in these sorts of conversations, which is of course important, but professional and technical staff tend to get left out to a greater or lesser degree. And I know that that's very frustrating for them, but it's also frustrating, I think, from being able to come up with workable, practical ideas that we can then implement. There is a risk that if you only talk to researchers, you're missing out half of the people that need to be involved in policy development and implementation. And some of the feedback we've got from our workshops has really reflected this. I know that professional and technical staff have been really pleased to see that we have adopted that approach of very deliberately and carefully involving them. And that speaks to the wider engagement that we've done and the fact that we have engaged people at multiple levels of the college, including senior leadership, to make sure that there is the backing and the legitimacy and the support for this project that we need.
I'd like to focus on two things Dr. Khan mentioned in the conversation. First is the introduction of a champion scheme. Interestingly, this is called Research Software Champions rather than Research Software Engineering Champions. And this is not just a semantic difference. Research Software Engineers are now a recognized job title in the UK, at least, and of course other countries, with specific roles in universities and research centres. But research software still gets written by a lot of researchers who would identify themselves as scientists and researchers rather than software engineers. And I would argue that this demographics is larger than the number of RSEs we have. Now, it's important that robust and sustainable software practices are being made available and are accessible to researchers and scientists in general, and having champions to promote that is an important step to achieve that. We'll be hearing more about the champion scheme at Imperial in some later episodes, including my conversations with some of the champions. The other point in our conversation is how we can recognize the different roles we have in research today. Science has long become a team-based effort, and yet the team-based effort in its output, be that a dataset, a software library or a community of practice, or the technical setup, is rarely, if ever, recognized. There are a number of initiatives that try to address that, and in this podcast show I talked about some of them in previous episodes, like the one on research roles with the Alan Turing Institute from last season. Then there's the Hidden Ref in the UK, which tries to encourage universities and research centres to submit a wider range of outputs for assessment by funding bodies such as Research England. In fact, the Hidden Ref has a target of 5% of submissions to be other than academic journal papers. Which brings me to my conversation with Professor Julie McCann from Imperial College. We discussed the efforts Imperial is taking to go beyond the publish or perish mentality, and we'll get back to the Hidden Ref during our chat. Hello, Julie McCann. Very nice to meet you today, and I'm very excited to talk about Beyond Open Research. Before we start, could you please introduce yourself quickly?
How you doing? I'm Julie McCann. I'm Vice Dean for Research from the Faculty of Engineering in Imperial College London, and I'm a computer scientist.
Excellent. We have RSE Championship, but we also have this initiative called Beyond Open Research. Could you give us a bit of background of what Beyond Open Research is and what your involvement in that was?
Well, I don't actually have direct involvement other than the encouragement to have proper practices of research, which includes its openness. its
Mm.
validity and its disciplined, robust scientific methods.
Right. And open science and open methods, of course, is a big theme. Open science is something that the phrase at least has existed for quite some time. But how do
Mhm.
we fill that actually with meaning in universities such as Imperial College?
Well, in Imperial, I mean, we have to directly address situations where openness are not so positive. So, for example, we want to be able to encourage our staff and our PhD students and so on to release their research, their data sets, and so on in an open and valid manner. This is for a number of reasons. So, for example, it allows us to collaborate better. It allows us to demonstrate our work in a cleaner, more trustworthy way, and so on. So, I mean, it's really important to us, and we encourage it through a number of schemes. Through, for example, training of both our students, our researchers, but also our staff as supervisors as well.
There was, of course, the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, and a number of models were put forward. And I do remember there was a discussion at the time how open they are or not. Do you see that the discussion around open science since then has become more forward thinking, or let's put it differently, maybe has gathered more momentum as a consequence of the COVID pandemic?
I'm not sure that it was because of the COVID pandemic. Maybe it's my lack of understanding, but to me, there is a movement this last 5 or 6 years more generally to making sure that science is robust and that the public trust in science is maintained and the scientific rigor of our work is maintained. I think it just happened that the pandemic, with many mistruths being spread, maybe confirmed that this ambition is something that we should strive for. But I think it was already happening beyond that. I think it's already been happening in good places that encourage good work more generally. But this is obviously tensioned against things like, for example, rating systems that we have in universities, which do include publications and citations. Google Scholar, everybody uses it, also
Mm.
publishes citation counts. All these things are not exactly encouraging robust open research as such and the practices that we should use. But we've always had it as a thing. I think maybe it just got more solid with some of the things that happened during COVID.
You mentioned publish, and there is the saying, of course, publish or perish.
Yeah.
When you have conversations with people, they always say, oh, yeah, the one thing that really matters is publications. But can we actually, or do you envisage a future where we can actually move away from that in the sense that, okay, publications are important and they will remain important, no doubt, but we can also consider other outputs, such as, for instance, software or data sets?
I think there's definitely a movement now to include other outputs as evidence. This is the bottom line is evidencing the impact or the importance of the work that you're doing. And yes, there is a movement now to accept a broader scope of what is evidencing this work. So software is one of those. The use of software. We could do with more metrics to be able to understand things like what it means to download software, usages,
Hmm.
tracking the usage, if it's open software and so on. Those kinds of things would make our lives easier in that regard. Other things like articles, outreach, and just different generally other outputs. When you think about it, if you went back to the big names of science back in the 50s, say, you wouldn't have had a ream of papers per year. They would have had a few, and the impact was still the same impact. It's trying to be able to evidence that impact, of that work, how it influenced others, and how it built things that are useful for humanity, essentially.
Exactly. And I think you mentioned a very important point that it's not the quantity of publications that matters, but rather the content of it.
Absolutely.
And with that in mind, and with software becoming more important and data, of course, becoming more important, there's something called the Hidden Ref, which is the Hidden Research Excellence Framework that aims to encourage universities to submit more stuff that isn't publications.
Yeah.
And what do you think about that? And how do you see Imperial maybe
Oh,
getting into that?
I think it's not a case of Imperial getting into it. I mean, we've been doing it at Imperial for some time. It takes a lot of effort to build a data set. So we've been building data sets for human activity recognition, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. A lot of people are involved, a
Mm.
lot of ethical reviews, and so on. It does take a lot of time, more than your standard paper. But the reward for us is that that data set is both used by us for a number of outputs, but also by our community. And by collaboration, we tend to do better as a subject. And also nowadays we do get recognised for publishing our data sets. And the ref is moving towards that. I mean, we have our case studies, we have the broader scope of outputs in ref.
Excellent.
Mm.
Because the aim, I think, was from Hidden Ref that they wanted to get to 5% of non-traditional output. And because I think the last ref it was something like 2 or 2.5% or something like that, a very small amount.
Yeah. I have to say, I'm not really keen on a hard percentage. I think it's what the work lends itself to. Not everybody's work requires people to produce data sets or other alternatives to papers, because some people's work is very heavily theoretical, for example, very valid, very important, very foundational work, doesn't necessarily need data sets. It horses for courses on this one, I think. Some subjects lend themselves easy to it, so go for it. Others don't so much, and we have to, take it on a case by case basis, really.
Going back to Imperial and the Beyond Open Research Initiative, there were 4 workshops this year. And I think on the various different subjects, and I talked to Dr. Hamid Khan about this. How do you see that going forward into the next phase? So, I mean, obviously, the 4 workshops is a good start, and there's the RS champions. But how do you see that going forward in Imperial, and what kind of measures do you think you're going to put into place?
I think it obviously can be brought forward in terms of the evidencing. When we do training in Imperial, what we tend to enjoy is when somebody's able to evidence some of the things, the concepts are being brought to us in training sessions with case studies and so on. And if these workshops are able to do that, that's marvelous, because it really hits home with examples why we need to, look at things the way we should. Also, in terms of our own promotion, and in terms of when we're bringing people to Imperial to join us and work with us, taking into account the broader scope of what that person has done in their time, not just publications, but all the other surrounding things and contributions to the society and the collaborative research that they do in the world, essentially, is very important. And it shouldn't be a single one element that we decide to take someone on for. So all these kinds of policies and activities could be informed by those workshops.
One question that always pops to my mind when I think about academia. So you have one department, or you have one faculty, then you have another faculty that does its thing, and they're all trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
But how do they actually exchange views, and how can you ensure that there is a flow of information across the silos, if I may put it that way?
Well, while we do have different faculties, we have 4 faculties, we do have a sort of infrastructure that allows us to communicate. So I'm Vice Dean for Research for Engineering. I talk regularly with the other Vice Deans for the other faculties, and these are the kinds of subjects that we talk about. And we talk also with senior management in the college as well about these subjects. These subjects are debated in our, for example, if it's a research thing, in our faculty research committees. And our faculty research committees are represented by all departments, and they bring up things that they're concerned about. We are able to communicate things that, for example, management think we should all be looking at, and we have a good lively debate, and we communicate across the faculties by making sure that we communicate these things, and we hold joint workshops on certain topics as well. So there's different mechanisms. It's not perfect, but we're working really hard to make sure that it does work.
Okay, so in future, the final questions. Where do you think the Beyond Open Research Initiative will be in a couple of years' time? Or where do you hope it will be?
Well, I hope it informs the things that people judge universities on. Okay. When people choose to go to a university, it's based on sets of metrics and feedback. And the metrics seem to dominate in terms of ranking lists and so on and so forth. Wouldn't it be lovely if that openness was one of the metrics? And if we're judging people, wouldn't it be lovely that Google Scholar had some of those metrics in it? Because when you're trying to decide who gets a job, whatever, it's hard to judge every part of their subject. You're not an expert in their subject. So people rely on these metric systems for universities for judging individuals and so on, sadly, for right or for wrong. And wouldn't it be nice that something about openness was included in those metrics?
Well, Imperial College in London is, of course, not the only institution that is working to implement open science principles and open research, as well as trying to go beyond them. For example, there are software champion schemes in other institutions as well. Still, it's great to see some concrete examples of how you can move from intent to implementation and what institutions are doing to transform the way we do research. All of that is part of a wider change, of course, that's been happening in science for a while, which makes it quite an interesting and exciting period to live in. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that first episode of the season, and here are just a couple of words at the end. This is an independent podcast, and as such depends on the support from the community and you. If you like what you hear, please consider sponsoring an episode or support me on my Patreon page. Contacting me is easy. There's a link at the top of the episode notes, and the show is on LinkedIn, Mastodon, and of course, there is always email if you prefer. So thanks very much, and keep listening. Oh, time's up. See you next time. But before I forget, this podcast is covered by the Creative Commons license. See ya.